My name is Helen Walker, and I am 63 years old. I've lived most of my life in the same quiet Midwestern town where my grandmother, Margaret, built her world brick by brick. She was the kind of woman who planted roses even after losing the strength to kneel, who said the heart should always remain in motion even when the body falters. And somehow, without meaning to, I became the granddaughter she trusted most. Not because I was special or wise or better than anyone else, but because I listened. Truly listened. She always said that was rarer than gold. Life in my small house was peaceful, predictable. I taught piano lessons 3 days a week, volunteered at the local seniors center on Thursdays, and spent my weekends tending the little greenhouse Grandma left me years before she passed. We shared a quiet bond built on soil and sunlight. My parents, her son Richard and daughter-in-law Linda, never quite understood why Grandma seemed to lean toward me. They were busy people, focused on climbing whatever invisible ladder they believed life demanded. I don't judge them for that, but it meant their visits to her were quick, efficient, almost transactional. Still, when Grandma grew frail, I assumed the family would naturally come together. But instead, something in the air shifted. A strange tension drifted between my parents and me, thin as fishing line yet sharp enough to cut. I felt it most intensely at the hospital, during those last quiet days when Grandma drifted in and out of sleep. Whenever I entered the room, my parents seemed to pause mid-conversation, as though I had stepped into something private. My father would clear his throat. My mother would adjust her purse strap. Tiny movements, but full of meaning. I ignored it then. Grief makes people odd. I reminded myself of that often. When Grandma passed peacefully, just after dawn on a Wednesday, I sat at her bedside and held her cooling hand. She looked calm, even triumphant, as though she had slipped through some doorway of her choosing. I whispered a promise that I would make her proud, though I had no idea what that would eventually require of me. Her funeral was modest, just as she requested. But the unease that had hovered around my parents now solidified into something unmistakable. They hovered over every document the funeral home handed out, each paper with her name on it. They stiffened when I approached to help. My mother even stepped between me and a simple envelope that clearly contained nothing more than the receipt for floral arrangements. It was strange. Odd enough that even my cousin, Matthew, raised an eyebrow at me during the service. But I kept my suspicions tucked deep within. As mourners lingered, sharing stories of Grandma's generosity and her tiny rebellions, like feeding stray cats despite city ordinances, I kept my distance from my parents' stiff, whispered conversations. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet, but I felt it the way one senses a storm long before the clouds gather. I tried to dismiss the thought as grief, as paranoia, as the awkwardness that often surfaces when a family's gravitational center disappears. But late that night, while lying in bed, listening to the old furnace click on and off, I remembered something Grandma once told me. She had taken my hand, her voice soft but steady. When people sense the truth slipping from their grasp, Helen, they tighten their fists. Watch the hands first. They reveal everything. At the funeral, my parents' hands had never stopped tightening. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet, steady certainty began forming. This was only the beginning. The day after the funeral, my parents called an impromptu family meeting at their house. I arrived with a plate of lemon bars, mostly out of habit. Food helps ease tension, or so I've always believed. But when I stepped inside, I knew immediately this was not a gathering where warmth or comfort would be welcomed. My mother stood rigid by the dining table. My father paced in a tight line, rubbing his temples as though preparing for a performance. A stack of papers sat in the center of the table, loose, disordered, and clearly handled far more than necessary. "We'll make this brief," my father began without greeting. "We've already spoken to your siblings." I nodded slowly, easing into a chair. "What's going on?" He exhaled sharply. "Your grandmother did not leave a will." The room seemed to tilt. Not because I believed him, but because the statement itself was absurd. Grandma was meticulous. She labeled garden tools. She kept receipts from the 1980s filed and cross-referenced. The idea that she would leave her property, her home, and her affairs in chaos was laughable. "I'm sorry," I said calmly, "but that doesn't make sense. I know she met with an attorney last year." My mother's lips pressed together. She changed her mind. "There is no will. It's been confirmed." "Confirmed by whom?" I asked, my voice steady even as my pulse rose. My father gave a vague gesture toward the stack of papers. "We searched thoroughly. Everything she left behind is right there. Nothing indicates a will." Their eyes locked on me, almost accusingly, as if expecting me to challenge them more aggressively. But I didn't. Not yet. I simply studied the scene. My father's pacing. My mother's trembling fingertips. The way they hovered protectively over the loose documents, as if guarding a treasure chest. "I see," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "You should also know," my mother added, "we've begun sorting through the house. Just clearing clutter." There was no sense in delaying. I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach tightened with a quiet dread. Grandma's home, her haven of memories, her rose-painted kitchen cabinets, her attic full of handwritten journals, described as clutter. And already divided? It was too soon, too deliberate. But I didn't react. I let the silence do the work. People often reveal more when given enough quiet to feel uncomfortable. My father, unsettled by my calmness, continued. "Since there's no will, everything defaults to us. Legally." His tone held a finality he clearly hoped would shut down further discussion. I nodded again. A slow, contemplative nod. "I appreciate you telling me," I said, though the words tasted bitter. The meeting ended without ceremony. They didn't offer me leftovers, hugs, or even eye contact as I left. I drove home in a fog, replaying their clipped responses, their rehearsed phrasing, their strangely defensive posture, and the glaring contradiction between the grandmother I knew and the narrative they forced upon me. By the time I reached my driveway, one truth settled firmly in my chest. They were lying, maybe about everything, but I had no idea yet that their lie would unravel itself without me lifting a finger. To understand what happened next, you need to know a little about my family history. Not the kind you scribble on genealogical charts, but the unspoken lines woven through relationships. The subtle resentments. The layered loyalties. The fractures created long before my generation ever realized they were standing on fault lines. My parents, Richard and Linda, had always been ambitious people. They came from modest beginnings, which fueled their drive to acquire, accumulate, and display. Their home was immaculate, staged like a catalog spread. My siblings, both younger, had inherited their worldview. Success was measured in square footage and brand names. Grandma, on the other hand, lived by a different philosophy. She valued stories over possessions. She believed character mattered more than accumulation. She saw money as a tool, not a trophy. This ideological divide created a constant hum of tension between her and my parents, though they masked it beneath polite conversations at family gatherings. Growing up, I spent more time with Grandma than anyone else. She taught me how to plant tomatoes, how to mend a torn hem, how to breathe through life's disappointments. She told me stories of her own struggles. The years she worked 2 jobs to keep the house after my grandfather died, the nights she sat awake worrying about bills, the moments she felt invisible within her own family. And she had confided something else, softly, as though afraid the wind might carry her words to the wrong ears. "I know how your parents see me," she once said while we trimmed roses together. "They think I'm clinging to a past that no longer matters. But a home is more than walls, Helen. It carries the weight of the people who lived and loved inside it." She squeezed my hand then, her eyes warm but sad. "When the time comes, I trust you to understand what truly deserves protection." I didn't fully grasp her meaning then. I thought she was simply being sentimental. But now, looking back, her words felt prophetic. My parents had always been preoccupied with her house. It was in a desirable neighborhood. Paid off. Full of antiques and decades of curated belongings. They often hinted, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, that the property would return to the family someday, meaning them specifically. Grandma never responded directly, but often her jaw tightened, or she'd suddenly change the subject. I assumed it was discomfort with talk of mortality. Only later would I realize it was deeper than that. So when my parents declared there was no will, I wasn't surprised by their desire. But I was stunned by their boldness. Their willingness to lie outright. Their certainty that they would face no challenge. Perhaps they assumed I would accept their claim out of politeness or emotional exhaustion. Perhaps they believed grief would cloud my judgment. They had always underestimated my resolve, mistaking my calmness for passivity. But here is the truth. I learned patience from Grandma, and patience is not weakness. Patience is preparation. And on the 7th day after her funeral, when the knock echoed through my hallway and I opened the door to find a man holding a briefcase, patience finally bore fruit. He introduced himself as Daniel Hargrove, attorney at law. His voice was steady, professional, yet carrying a faint weight, as though he bore a message long overdue. "Ms. Walker," he he said. Your grandmother left explicit instructions that I deliver something to you personally. No one else. My breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition. This moment had been quietly approaching, like a train you sense long before you hear the whistle. May I come in? He asked. I led him to the kitchen table, the same place where Grandma had once taught me to roll out pie crusts. Daniel placed his leather briefcase in front of him, clicked it open, and carefully retrieved a sealed, cream-colored envelope. My name, only my name, written in Grandma's elegant cursive. I don't understand, I whispered. He folded his hands. Your grandmother met with me 18 months ago. She drafted a full will. She was very clear about her intentions. But she also believed there might be complications. Complications, I repeated, though I suspected exactly what she meant. He nodded gently. She worried certain family members might attempt to interfere. She instructed me to file the original with the county and deliver this copy to you only upon her passing. So my parents' claim of no will was not just a lie. It was deliberate manipulation. A calculated attempt to control her estate before the truth surfaced. I opened the envelope slowly, feeling the gravity of each movement. Inside was a letter written in Grandma's hand, along with a photocopy of the will itself. Before reading the legal text, I unfolded the letter. My dearest Helen, it began. Her voice seemed to rise from the page, as though she were sitting beside me. If you are reading this, it means my time has come. The others may try to claim my home for themselves. But they never loved it the way you did. You saw the memories, not the monetary value. You understood what family truly means. That is why I chose you. My hands trembled. The words blurred. Not from shock, but from profound emotional clarity. She continued, I leave you my property, house, land, and everything within it. This is not to punish your parents, though I know they may take it that way. It is simply because my heart tells me you will honor what this home represents. By the time I finished the letter, I could no longer hear the ticking clock on the wall. Only the soft hum of truth settling into place. I looked at Daniel. My parents told me she died without a will. His expression hardened. I suspected as much. The document was filed legally and cannot be contested on the grounds of ignorance. They likely assumed it never existed. A quiet strength unfurled in my chest. Not anger, clarity. What should I do next? I asked. He slid a folder toward me. Review the documents thoroughly. Then we can proceed with notifying the family and securing the property. Securing the property. As if it were under threat. And it was. But I was no longer afraid. Because Grandma had armed me with the truth long before I realized I would need to wield it. As Daniel stood to leave, he paused at the door. She trusted you, Ms. Walker, he said. More than anyone. After he left, I sat alone for a long time, the envelope beside me, the weight of justice settling into my hands. Cliffhanger. And that night, as I prepared to visit Grandma's house, I discovered just how far my parents had already gone. The next morning, I drove to Grandma's property. The driveway gravel crunched under my tires the way it always had. But the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. Something was wrong the moment I stepped onto the porch. The front door, usually stiff from humidity, swung open easily. Inside, the rooms were in disarray. Furniture shifted. Cabinet doors open. Rugs rolled up. Boxes half filled with items that clearly weren't clutter. It looked like a rushed estate sale orchestrated without respect, without ceremony, without permission. And there, in the living room, stood my parents. My mother was wrapping porcelain figurines in newspaper. My father was directing two men who were loading furniture into a truck parked outside. They froze when they saw me. What are you doing here? My father demanded. I stepped deeper into the room, letting my gaze sweep over the plundered space. I should be asking you the same question. My mother recovered first. We told you, Helen. Since there's no will, everything defaults to us. We're simply getting the house ready to list. I studied her expression. Tight. Defensive. Guilty. That's interesting, I replied calmly, because a lawyer visited me yesterday. My father's face darkened. What lawyer? Grandma's attorney. The one who drafted her legally binding will. Silence. Heavy. Stagnant. My mother's voice faltered. She didn't have a will. She did, I said, pulling the envelope from my purse. And she left me everything. The property. The contents. All of it. My father stepped forward. That's impossible. I placed the copy of the will on the dining table they had already stripped bare. Read it. They didn't move. So I continued, my voice steady but cold as winter glass. "You lied to the entire family. You told everyone there was no will because you intended to take the house before anyone discovered the truth." My mother's hands shook, the newspaper crinkling loudly. "We raised you," she whispered. "How could you accuse us of something so cruel?" I met her eyes, unblinking. "Because you did something so cruel." My father's jaw tightened. "We deserve that property. We cared for her financially for years." "That doesn't give you the right to fabricate a lie," I replied. "And it doesn't override her legal wishes." Finally, my father snatched up the will, scanning it quickly. His face drained of color. This can't be valid. We would have known." "You didn't know because she didn't trust you," I said softly. "And you proved her right." The room felt colder than December wind. My parents stood surrounded by half-emptied boxes, the remnants of a home they'd tried to claim through deceit. And then I noticed something. A drawer pulled completely from Grandma's desk, sitting upside down on the floor. Papers scattered as though searched through in haste. They hadn't just lied. They had looked for the will. They had searched, ransacked, and torn through her belongings hoping to find it first. The truth wasn't just unfolding. It was damning. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Calm truth can cut deeper than anger ever will. "Pack everything back," I said quietly. "Leave the house today. And do not remove another item." My father squared his shoulders. "You can't order us around. This belongs to me," I said, holding the will between us. "By Grandma's choice. By law. And by the values she tried to teach all of us." He stepped closer, but I held my ground. "You manipulated the situation," I continued. "You lied about the existence of a will. You misled family members. And you began stripping this house before the legal process even began." My mother's voice cracked. "We just wanted what we felt was fair." "Fairness," I replied, "is not determined by entitlement. It's determined by truth." The room pulsed with tension. The two movers stood awkwardly in the doorway, sensing the storm but unsure of their role. I turned to them. "Gentlemen, thank you for your time. But this move is cancelled. You are not authorized to remove anything from this property." They looked from me to my father. My father raised his voice. "Ignore her. But legal certainty has a tone people instinctively recognize." "I can show you documentation," I added, establishing my ownership. The movers exchanged a look, then slowly set the furniture down. One muttered, "We're not getting involved in a legal dispute," and they stepped out of the house. My father exploded. "You've ruined everything." "What I've done," I answered, "is restored the truth." I walked to the doorway and held it open. "You need to leave." My mother stepped toward me, grief and fury intertwined. "She was my mother. And you were her daughter," I said gently. "But you didn't honor that. You saw property, not legacy." Tears welled in her eyes, but she turned away. My father refused to move. "We will contest this. You have no idea what you're up against." I studied him for a long moment. "You're threatening me because you lost something that was never yours." He stared, shaking with a mix of rage and desperation I had never witnessed in him before. "Please go," I repeated, calm as stone. Eventually, he brushed past me, muttering curses under his breath. My mother followed, whispering a fractured apology that dissolved into silence. When their car finally pulled out of the driveway, the house seemed to exhale, as if relieved to be protected once more. I walked through each room, restoring what I could, straightening cushions, closing drawers, placing figurines back on shelves. My hands moved slowly, reverently, as though carrying out a final act of loyalty. And as the sun lowered, casting warm amber light across the living room floorboards, I whispered a quiet promise. "I'll take care of it, Grandma, just like you trusted me to." But little did I know, the confrontation wasn't over. Because the next family dinner would reveal the full extent of the damage. The invitation came through my sister, phrased as a simple dinner to reconnect after everything. I accepted, knowing full well it would be anything but simple. When I walked into my parents' dining room, conversation stopped abruptly. My siblings shifted uncomfortably. My mother avoided my gaze entirely. My father sat rigid at the head of the table, his expression carved from stone. I greeted everyone calmly and took my seat. The table was set elegantly, linen napkins, polished silverware, a centerpiece of white lilies. All the trappings of refinement, none of the warmth. Dinner began in brittle silence. Forks touched plates with delicate precision, but no one met my eyes. It was as though I carried an invisible weight that no one dared acknowledge. Finally, my sister, Emily, cleared her throat. We heard you received something from Grandma's lawyer. I nodded. Yes. She left me her property. My brother shifted. All of it. All of it, I confirmed, my tone neutral. My mother flinched. My sister whispered. Why would she do that? Because I listened. Because I cared. Because I never treated her home as a prize to be claimed. But I answered simply. Grandma explained her reasons clearly. I won't speak for her beyond that. My father slammed his fork down. She was manipulated. She wasn't thinking clearly when she made that will. I met his glare steadily. The attorney confirmed she was of sound mind, and the county accepted the filing without challenge. So that's it, he demanded. You just take everything? I inhaled slowly. I didn't take anything. I received what she intentionally left. She wanted equity, he shouted. No, I said softly. She wanted honesty. Silence. Chilling. Suffocating. Then my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We were counting on that house, Helen. We made plans. We needed it. Her vulnerability stung, but not enough to excuse what they had done. You could have told me, I replied gently. We could have had an open conversation. Instead, you lied. You ransacked her home. You tried to erase her final wishes. My siblings exchanged tense glances. They hadn't realized the full extent of the betrayal. My father rose from the table, pacing. So what now? Are you going to sell it? Flip it? Profit off sentiment? I shook my head. I'm restoring it. I'm keeping it in the family, but with integrity, not entitlement. He scoffed. How noble. But the others looked relieved. My sister even softened. You're really keeping it? Yes, I said. And anyone who wants to visit, help maintain the garden, or reconnect with her memory is welcome. But the days of seeing the house as a prize are over. That declaration settled across the room like fresh snow, quiet, undeniable, and cold. Dinner ended soon after. No dessert. No lingering conversation. Just the sound of chairs scraping and winter wind pressing against the windows. As I stepped outside, the chill cut through my coat. But something inside me felt warm. Solid. Rooted. Justice had been served, not through vengeance but through truth. And the consequences, though painful, were necessary. Cliffhanger. But the final chapter belonged not to conflict, but to healing. Part 8. Reflection and Moral Closure. Approximate. 625 words. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. And slowly, the fractures in our family began to settle into something less volatile, though still delicate. Trust, once broken, doesn't grow back overnight. But truth creates the soil where healing can eventually take root. I spent more time at Grandma's house, tending to her neglected garden beds, polishing the floors she once insisted were too pretty to be stepped on, reading her old journals as though she had left a conversation suspended in time just for me. The house felt alive again, not because of possessions or property value, but because her presence lingered in every corner. I felt her when sunlight hit the kitchen window just right. I heard her laughter in the creak of the upstairs hallway. I sensed her approval each time I restored a room with care rather than greed. One afternoon, as I swept the porch, my mother arrived unannounced. She stood at the gate, shivering not from the cold but from something deeper. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded. She walked slowly up the steps. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said. "About what we did. About what your grandmother chose." I waited. "I was wrong," she whispered. "We should have respected her decisions. I thought we deserved something after everything we gave." Her honesty, fragile as it was, felt like a crack in the ice, dangerous but necessary for thaw to begin. "You deserved love," I said gently. "Not things." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I loved her, even when I didn't show it well." "I know." We stood together in silence, the winter air sharp but forgiving. "I hope," she added quietly, "that someday you can forgive us. Forgiveness takes time, but that day I offered her the first step." "I'm willing to try," I said. "But we rebuild with truth. Nothing else." She nodded gratefully. As she left, I felt something unclench inside my chest, a tether loosening, allowing breath to flow freely again. Later that evening, I sat in Grandma's old armchair, the copy of her will resting beside me. I realized then that this story was never about property. It was about legacy, about the courage to tell the truth even when others try to bury it, about honoring the people who shaped us, not by claiming their things, but by living their values. Grandma believed the truth always finds the one it belongs to. And she was right. Her truth found me not through confrontation, but through quiet trust, through preparation, through faith that character would prevail where greed attempted to distort. As I closed her journal and turned off the lamp, I felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything had been resolved neatly, but because the right thing had finally been done. And to those who hear my story, I offer this. When someone tries to hide the truth, it is usually because they fear what it reveals about them. But truth does not disappear. It waits, patiently, persistently, until the person meant to carry it is strong enough to receive it. If this story resonates with you, share your own experiences. Tell me, have you ever discovered a truth someone tried to keep from you? And what did it teach you? The truth always returns to the one it belongs to.